I start with the notes that I've written for today, that we recall or remember that the scripture that Bruce read from today in Acts was about a man named Stephen, the stoning of Stephen. And henceforth, that's how I got our title today, How to Get Stoned. Of course, it does sound a little funny in our secular world or in our minds, and I understand that, and I'm hoping it drew some attention to us. Because I'm also hoping that if you could not place the context of how to get stoned on the sign in front of a church into the right place, that, well, it's been a long time since you've been in church. And maybe it would be time to get back a little bit. But it is kind of funny, and it's okay to laugh at it as well. But in this verse, there's another name mentioned as well, or in the scriptures, and it's the name of Saul. You might recall that Saul, sometime after in Acts, not long after this event, on his way to Damascus, encounters Jesus in a very powerful way and becomes then known as Paul. This man goes from being the one who held the coats of those being stoning of Stephen, a man who had seen visions of God and who was testifying about God, and who had even taken the time to ask for forgiveness of those stoning him to death. Saul goes from the man who stands by and basically says, "Let me hold your coats while you do this," to the man who more of our Old Testament is written about than even Jesus himself. People can change, and people do change in our world. But let's get to this getting stoned part. That's what we're all here for anyway. So getting stoned. It's never happened to me. Well, maybe it has in the metaphorical sense that I'll talk about at some point in the sermon, but that's about it. I've heard about getting stoned. I've read about it. I've seen video. I've even found some instruction on the various ways you can do it. But I personally have never experienced it. Though lately it's been on my mind a lot, especially this past week, having read the scriptures for today. Man, there was a lot going on in my life this week, and then this idea came to me about Stephen and others in our world who have been stoned. It just wouldn't get out of my thoughts. How does one get stoned? How do you end up in that position? How can you not see it coming and try to avoid it? I mean, maybe because this guy Stephen's pretty important. He's considered one of the first martyrs, if not the first martyr, of the Christian church. Maybe this is something I should consider myself if I'm truly into this Jesus the Messiah, Jesus my Savior, as our scripture says today, Jesus the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus our Redeemer. If I'm really into this thing, maybe I need to be pondering what it is to get stoned a little bit more often than I do. If not getting stoned like Stephen did in our epistle reading today, then maybe at least a good martyring should be on my mind from time to time. By the way, the Greek word martyrs, where we take the word martyr from, has been translated quite often in the Bible to the word witness. So there are times when you read the Bible before us today where it will say witness, where in the original Greek it was actually the word martyrs. Maybe this means that something that we consider an extreme case of testifying to our belief to the point of a persecution that results in death may not have been so extreme after all at one point in our faith history. Maybe martyring and being stoned was kind of an expected occurrence in a life of faith. Maybe it's more the expectation of the early followers of the way than it was something we consider to be so rare and extreme in our world. And it's really not as rare as we might think. And as I mentioned the way, as we talk about the early followers of Jesus, it's important to think of another very interesting thing. The first followers of Jesus were called followers of the way. They were not called Christians. That word came along later, and it means actually little Christ. So that by proclaiming the word Christian in our life, we are proclaiming that we are little Christ. Little mini-me's, if you might say, for our Savior. That's right, Christians are miniature versions of who for the love of all humankind suffered to the point of being hung on a cross. That's important to let that sink in for a bit. We, by calling ourselves Christians, are called to be miniature versions of Christ. How we interpret that means a lot of different things. So, the list of those who have been stoned, martyred, and other ways of dying in the name of our faith goes on and on throughout history. In the beginning, there's Abel, and then it goes to Zechariah. There's John the Baptist, who had his head served on a platter. There's Stephen and James. Some consider Antipas, who shows up in Revelation, and he was burned inside a brass chamber as a martyr. Those are just a few of the examples of biblical characters who suffered their fate because of their faith. But we also have modern-day martyrs as well, those who for some reason we never hear about in the news, but still have died for the sake of their faith. There's Sister Leonella Scorbati. I hope I said that right. She was born in Italy in 1940. When she was 25, she entered the covenant as a Consolata missionary sister. She spent years ministering as a missionary in Kenya. And in 2002, not really all that long ago in church history, she moved to Somalia. There she worked to open a training center for Somalians who wished to become nurses at the only hospital in Somalia. A person truly living out her faith. On September 17th of 2006, she was shot as she left the center from teaching nursing classes. You see, not everybody wants people in their communities to get help. And certainly there are many parts of the world who don't want to see women rise to having an education and a profession. As she was dying, her last words, like Stephen's, were, "I forgive, I forgive, I forgive." Then there's Annalena Tonelli, another person born in Italy. Italy tends to produce a lot of martyrs, I think. I don't know. Annalena was a lawyer. At 25 years old, she moved to Africa to work with the Committee Against World Hunger. At just 25, she made that decision. An organization she, at 25, helped to found. Later in her life, she moved to a place called Barama, where she founded a tuberculosis hospital. Their $20,000 monthly maintenance bills at that hospital were completely funded by her friends and family back in Italy. She brought HIV and AIDS patients into the hospital because she believed they deserved to be treated like human beings and children of God. If you know a little about the history of the AIDS epidemic in Africa, you might know that those patients were not always treated with that dignity. In fact, they were shamed and persecuted over and over again. Her move to do this, to treat HIV and AIDS patients in a hospital that she was having funded completely by private sources, was not accepted well. And in November of 2002, protesters threw stones into the windows of the hospital and chanted, "Death to Annalena." On October 5th of 2003, she was shot in the head and killed while working inside the hospital she founded. Then there's Father Jacques Hamel, this one born in France in 1930. At age 28, again at a very young age, he was ordained a priest and served in various churches, including Notre Dame de Saint-Delors and various others. Along with being a parish priest, he also served on the Interfaith Committee with Mohammed Karabila, who was the president of France's Regional Council on Muslims. This was a man who not only valued his faith, but the faith of others as well. Father Hamel, on July of 2016, almost a year ago today, had his throat slit while he was giving morning mass in front of his congregation. It's been asked of the Pope to proclaim Father Hamel as a saint, but that process takes many years. There are so many more throughout history and even throughout our world in our common era that martyr or die or are persecuted for the sake of their faith. We tend to have the luxury in our country to not have to do that, or to be able to have the privilege to easily ignore the need for that. But if you'll remember, just a few weeks ago, Coptic Christians in Egypt experienced a similar fate. On Palm Sunday of this year, not long ago, 44 were killed in a bombing of their church in Egypt. Just in December, there were 30 killed in the same country of the same faith. And yet, the very next week after Palm Sunday, after threats, after bombing that killed 44 of their church members, these Christians still gathered on Easter Sunday to worship their God. I'm not sure how we would react to the same occurrence in our life today. I hope that we would take the example they did. So if we go back to the title for a second, how is it that we get stoned? How is it that we become witnesses to the point of martyrdom? It's simple, really. It's not all that complicated when it occurs. We simply follow the way. We simply act like little Christ. We do exactly what we are claiming to do all along, all while knowing there is great risk to it in many places, including here even in our own community to some degrees. Because trust me, there is great risk to this life as a Christian. If you do this thing right, at the very least, people are going to point fingers and persecute you as an individual, and even us as a church, as a part of the body of Christ. If we're really doing this thing right, people are going to say things about us in their own way, throwing stones and rocks at us. It's really the only way, and it's documented throughout history, that this is what always happens. At any point, the faith is being lived out in the way it is truly meant to be. Like I said, I've obviously never been literally stoned by anyone, but if we were to think about it as a metaphor for a minute, perhaps we've all experienced it in some way. I know for certain that I have. I know that people love to throw verbal and written rocks all the time in my direction, especially being in this position. As we say, those who tend to live in glass houses often do it more than they should, and they definitely should not. Am I willing to do that? Am I willing to take the verbal and written persecutions that occur? Absolutely. I can be bold enough to stand here and say that I'm okay with that. If someone wants to say bad things about me, or write bad things to me or about me, I can stand that kind of heat. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to always enjoy it, and I'm not saying it's not going to hurt my feelings at some times, but I know it would never be enough to call me away from this life. I know that if I'm not making people squirm a little with funny sermon titles and uncomfortable messages every now and then, including myself feeling a little uncomfortable at the challenges I make and that I believe God gives to us, that if I'm not making mistakes, then I'm not trying hard enough. If I live a seemingly untouchable, sinless, righteous life that nobody in this community ever questions, if I'm comfortable, then I'm not like the little Christ of long ago. I'm more like a God that I'm trying to create for myself. And that, my friends, is just another way of saying I'm more like my own ego. My own ego becomes my God, and I'm not truly following in the God of our Holy Scriptures. Am I willing to get literally stoned? Am I willing to stand here and say that people could throw rocks at me and kill me in such a manner? I don't know, to be honest. I want to think that I would be brave enough to do that, but I have nothing if I don't have my honesty with you all. I want to occupy a special room among those many rooms we read about today. But to be honest, for right now, I'm happy trying to bring a little bit of the kingdom of God right here to where we are in Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. So I know that in some way I fall short from those people who I study and admire. Not just the people in our Bible, the people that should be appearing in our news when other people are showing up all the time. But this question isn't just about me. It's for all of us. Exactly how far are we willing to go? I'm not asking you all to walk around with a bag of rocks and hand them to people to throw at you. You know me better than that. But how many among us are Stephens, at least to some degree? How many of us are full of visions and witness to others, and are even more so, almost more importantly than the wisdom or the visions and the witness, is the forgiveness that Stephen offered and asked for the ones who murdered him? How many of us are like little Christ? Because if you recall, Christ did the same thing when he hung on the cross. I think there are some of us out there. There are some Stephens out there. And I think that whether there's 5 or 5,000 or 5 million, that when you put them together, they add up to a whole lot of good in our world. People, like I mentioned previously in this message, the people from Italy and France, the Coptic Christians of Egypt, Stephen and James and Peter and John the Baptist, people like them, I believe, live right here in this community. All they need to realize is that they already have that precious stone I talked about with the children today. We all already have that precious stone. He is our rock, our foundation, and he is who we are built upon. Our precious stone is Jesus Christ. Amen.